Water and electrolyte balance is the topic of the screencast, which may be found in Chapter 15 of your textbook. The objectives of the screencast are as follows. Describe the distribution of water in the human body. Define water balance. Identify the sources of water input. Identify the sources of water output. Explain the importance of electrolyte and water balance. Describe the effects of antidiuretic hormone on water output and water balance. And lastly, describe the effects of aldosterone on electrolyte and water balance. Water is the most abundant substance in the human body. In a young adult female, it accounts for 50% of body weight, and in young adult males, 60% body weight. This difference in water content reflects the generally lower amount of fat in males relative to females. Babies have a very low percentage of fat and also low bone density, and therefore water accounts for about 75% of the weight of a newborn. However, as we age, our bones become more dense and the fat content of our bodies tends to steadily increase, such that by old age, water only accounts for 45% of body weight. Recall the importance of water as it is necessary for many body functions. Recall that water is a universal solvent and transports solutes throughout the body. Also, it is the medium in which all chemical reactions occur. Also recall that water represents 90% of plasma. Plasma is 55% of whole blood, and therefore blood is a little under 50% water. Blood volume, of course, affects blood pressure. So maintaining water balance, or the appropriate amount of water in the body, is critically important to maintaining homeostasis. Now let's look at the distribution of water in the body. Water is located in what are called fluid compartments. And we can use water and body fluid interchangeably. Body fluids are simply water with different concentrations of different solutes in them. The largest fluid compartment would be the intracellular fluid. 2/3 of the water in your body is actually found within your cells in the intracellular fluid. The other two compartments are found outside of your cells in the extracellular fluid. And those compartments are the interstitial fluid, that's the fluid that's found between your cells, and the blood plasma. They represent the bulk of the extracellular fluids. However, there are small amounts of water in the extracellular fluids, such as the humors of the eye, the cerebral spinal fluid, as well as the lymph of the lymphatic system. This figure from your book illustrates how the three fluid compartments are very much connected to one another. Recall that the plasma transports substances throughout the body and therefore is the link between the internal and external environment. Exchanges occur almost continuously, for example, between the plasma and the lungs, the plasma and the GI tract, and the plasma and the kidneys. So as these organs remove substances from and deposit substances into the plasma, they can alter the composition and the volume of the plasma, which will quickly lead to similar changes in the interstitial fluid, which eventually will lead to similar changes in the intracellular fluid. In other words, these three fluid compartments are very much connected, such that changes in one will very quickly lead to similar changes in the others. Maintaining appropriate composition of solutes, particularly the electrolytes, in the fluid compartments is just as important as the volume of the fluids. And in fact, you can't really change one without altering the other. However, for simplicity, we will consider first water balance and then electrolyte balance separately. Water balance is maintaining proper levels of water in the body. In other words, maintaining proper levels of hydration in the body. To maintain water balance, the body therefore can lose no more or no less water than it takes in. So what happens if the body loses more water than it takes in? The body becomes dehydrated, and with that loss of water, you can get a decrease in blood volume, which can cause a drop in blood pressure. On the other hand, what if the body loses less water than it takes in? Well, that water has to go somewhere, and so it's going to move from the plasma into the interstitial fluid, and this can cause swelling. And from the interstitial fluid, it can actually move into the cells and cause swelling of the cells. Also, an increase in the plasma of blood can lead to hypertension. Now that we have established the importance of water balance, let's now look at our sources of water intake and sources of water loss or output. About 10% of the water found in the body actually comes from metabolic processes occurring in the body. The other 90% comes from the food and beverages that we consume, particularly the beverages. So we can significantly increase or decrease water intake by increasing or decreasing the consumption of beverages and, to a lesser extent, foods. Now let's look at the sources of water output or loss. A small amount of water is lost through the feces and also through perspiration, and of course that can vary quite a bit due to the type of activity you might be engaged in and the temperature of the environment. A surprising amount of water is actually lost through breathing and through your skin. This is called insensible water loss because you're pretty much unaware that your body is losing water through these processes. The lion's share or the bulk of the water lost by the body is, of course, through the urine. About 60% of water is lost by urine production and elimination. Therefore, your body is going to seek to maintain water balance by increasing or decreasing urine production. Now let's apply what you've learned to your own experiences. I'm sure you have noticed that if you consume a lot of fluid through increased consumption of beverages, you tend to urinate more. And you probably have experienced a situation where you were outside working, doing something where you were sweating a lot, and perhaps at the same time not really consuming as many fluids as you should, and you noticed that there was a decrease in urine production. This is your body's way of trying to ensure that you maintain water balance, that no more water is lost through urine production than is taken in. So as you consume more fluids, you urinate more. As you consume fewer fluids or lose water through other mechanisms, you urinate less. So the kidneys can alter the volume of water excreted as urine in order to adjust for changes in water input. Well, how do the kidneys do this? Well, remember the process of urine formation. It involves filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. The kidneys simply alter the amount of water that is reabsorbed from the renal tubules, and this is controlled by hormones. Hormones allow the kidneys to alter the amount of water reabsorbed from the renal tubule and collecting ducts. So hormones alter the amount of water excreted as urine. Let's look now at the effects of antidiuretic hormone. Remember, diuresis is the production of urine, so antidiuretic hormone obviously is going to decrease urine production. Let's say we have an individual that is well hydrated. They're drinking or taking in more fluid than they need, and so the body is reabsorbing less water from the renal tubule and less water from the collecting duct, and therefore the individual is producing large volumes of dilute urine. You of course realize if you drink a lot of water, you produce a lot of urine, and that urine tends to be lighter in color, sometimes colorless. Now let's say you go outside and you are working in the hot sun, you're sweating a lot, and you're not drinking as much water as you probably should. Likely there may be a slight drop in blood pressure and probably an increase in the concentration of solutes in your blood. This will trigger osmoreceptors, which will send impulses to the hypothalamus, resulting in the secretion of antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone targets the kidneys, causing an increase in the reabsorption of water from the collecting duct. This results in a smaller volume of concentrated urine. Again, if you're not consuming sufficient amounts of fluids, you produce less urine, and that urine tends to be darker in color. This flowchart from your book illustrates the various mechanisms that help maintain blood pressure homeostasis, the sequence of events that leads to the stimulation of secretion of antidiuretic hormone, and its effects, as previously described, are shown here in purple. I mentioned earlier that the solute concentrations of the various fluid compartments were as important as the water volumes or fluid volumes themselves. And this is because they play a critical role in maintaining homeostasis. Electrolyte levels, such as the concentrations of sodium and potassium and chloride ions and others, are very important for proper functioning of neurons and muscles. And osmotic balance between the fluid compartments can be affected significantly by those ions as well. For example, if sodium levels in your blood drop, they can cause fluid to move from the plasma into the interstitial fluid, and this causes swelling of your tissues or a generalized edema of the body tissues. So although for simplicity we separated water and solutes or salt, the two are very much linked. And therefore the kidney regulates not only the water balance of the body, but also the electrolyte levels as well. I mentioned earlier that hormones can alter the water content of urine and therefore control water output by the kidneys. Well, hormones can alter not only the water content of the urine, but the electrolytes that are excreted in urine as well. If you recall, 80% of sodium filtered from the blood is reabsorbed from the proximal tubule. The hormone aldosterone targets the distal tubule and increases reabsorption of sodium from the distal tubule. In fact, if aldosterone secretion is of a sufficient magnitude, almost all of the sodium can be reabsorbed from the distal tubule, and therefore very little sodium lost in the urine. As sodium is reabsorbed, chloride ion follows as well. So sodium and chloride, table salt is reabsorbed from the distal tubule. Now, there is an old adage that water follows salt, and this adage reflects the fact that when sodium and chloride ions, which are charged particles, when they move, they tend to attract another charged molecule, water. And so as sodium and chloride are being reabsorbed, water is being reabsorbed as well. As sodium and chloride ions are being reabsorbed, potassium is exchanged for sodium ion. In other words, potassium ion is being secreted into the distal convoluted tubule as sodium is being reabsorbed. So in summary, aldosterone decreases the amount of water and sodium ion and chloride ion that is excreted in urine while increasing the amount of potassium ion excreted in urine. Going back to this flow chart showing various impacts on blood pressure, the portion that involves aldosterone is shown in green. A drop in blood pressure and blood volume reduces the filtrate volume or solute content in the renal tubules through a rather complicated process, which I am not going to hold you responsible for. A substance called angiotensin 2 is formed in the blood, and that targets the adrenal cortex and causes the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone into the blood. Aldosterone then targets the kidney tubules, causing reabsorption of sodium, reabsorption of chloride, and following that sodium and chloride, reabsorption of water. Now let's review the objectives of this screencast. Describe the distribution of water in the human body. Define water balance. Identify the sources of water input. Identify the sources of water output. Explain the importance of electrolyte and water balance. Describe the effects of antidiuretic hormone on water output and water balance. Describe the effects of aldosterone on electrolyte and water balance. The topic of our next screencast will be maintaining acid-base balance.